in your seed, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they rose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt at Beersheba. Okay, so it seems like the testing of Abraham is only relevant inasmuch as his faithfulness is able to be passed down genetically. Otherwise, there's no reason whatsoever why his personal faithfulness would matter in why a nation being called and chosen by God should be blessed. This seems to be confirmed in Hebrews 7, which uses Abraham's seed to prove that the priesthood of Melchizedek is greater than that of Levi. I'll read Hebrews 7, 4 through 10, and then I'll finish my comment. Just think how great he was, referring to Melchizedek. Even the patriarch Abraham gave a tenth of the plunder. Now the law requires that the descendants of Levi who became the priests to collect a tenth from the people, that is, from their fellow Israelites. Even though they are descendant from Abraham, this man, however, did not trace his descent from Levi. Yet he collected a tenth from Abraham and blessed him who had the promises. And without doubt, the lesser is blessed by the greater. In the one case, the tenth is collected by people who die, but in the other case, by him who is declared to be living. This is the important part. One might even say that Levi, who collects the tenth, paid a tenth through Abraham to Melchizedek, because Melchizedek met Abraham, and Levi was still in the body of his ancestor. Did you catch that? Levi, the royal priesthood that would come later, according to the writer of Hebrews, is still inside of the body of Abraham. Therefore, when Abraham gives the sacrifice to Melchizedek, that means that Melchizedek is an even greater priest than the priests of Levi, because the priests of Levi were in the body of Abraham who gave the offering to Melchizedek. So I say all that to say this: the ancient conception was that all of the people that would ever live from an ancestor were inside of that ancestor. So everybody that ever came from the line of Abraham, they believed, were individually seeds inside of Abraham. And then those seeds get passed genetically, so on and so forth. Now, they didn't really understand what we know today, in which only tiny pieces of genetics get passed down. But they literally believed that all of the descendants of Abraham were within Abraham, which means the only way in which the blessing of the nation of Israel matters in relation to Abraham's faith is inasmuch as perhaps that faith is able to be passed down through his seed. Because otherwise, why do we care if Abraham's faithful or not? We only care if Abraham's children do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
Like, God doesn't care if Abraham was faithful. He still needs Abraham's children to follow him.
All right, so if these people knew what we know now, they wouldn't have even written this, right?
Well, it's possible, because theoretically, we know that personality traits are passed down genetically, not perfectly, but they are passed down genetically.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the ancient context here would lead you to believe that it was more of a one-to-one thing. If you were faithful, your offspring would be faithful. Nevertheless, it's hard for me to understand why Abraham's faithfulness has anything to do with the blessing of his offspring.
Right.
What if 5 generations from Abraham, all of his kids are a bunch of... Why are we blessing them? And is that fair? And we see that they're not. We see that the Israelites go astray over and over and over again.
Right.
So why is God not able to know that this is going to be a problem? So Deuteronomy 7:7-9 says, "The Lord did not set his affection on you and choose you because you were more numerous than other peoples, for you were the fewest of all peoples. But it was because the Lord loved you and kept the oath he swore to your forefathers. that he brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the land of slavery and from the power of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. So it's interesting here that, God is emphasizing that he didn't choose Israel because of anything special. But if we're reading the story of Abraham seriously, I mean, he chose Abraham and made his descendants great because theoretically he passed the test of faith and obedience.
Mm-hmm.
So at what point does it turn to, hey, I'm only saving you stiff-necked people because I told your forefather I would? So I guess if God chose to multiply Abraham's descendants, even though they weren't special and they weren't particularly faithful, well, what in the world is the point of testing Abraham? How does it matter then? His faithfulness at this point to sacrifice his own son outside of the covenant he made with him seems to be a useless exercise. The sacrifice of Isaac could be completely removed from the text, and it would not affect the story at all. In fact, it might improve the story. From a strictly functional standpoint, what does this story do? I can't think of a good reason for this story to exist other than, hey, this was part of the cultural narrative, and we have to include it. And I know there are a lot of people who probably have some answers to like why this story makes sense, but I fail to find why it makes sense in relation to blessing his offspring, which it seems to be that's what this is for. This is specifically the last test before God is like, okay, I'll bless your offspring, even though I already said I would.
Mm-hmm.
I would have loved to hear the alternate rendering of this story where Abraham doesn't sacrifice his child and God's like, well, I already made a covenant. I guess I'll just do the thing I told you I do.